I recently got back into outdoor sketching and landscape painting, and especially started to combine my usual watercolors with gouache. While I really like this soft watery look here for a sketch I made in Seoul, I've been itching to push gouache further and try out a more realistic painting style with them, since they are such a versatile medium. So instead of 1 or 2 large scenes, I went with small sketches for this spread. My goal was simple: to draw mostly from life, find beauty in the mundane, look for unique views while wandering around Seoul, and make my gouache paints look less watery. As you can see, these do look a bit denser and darker than the previous page, but they still have that soft watercolor-ish look. I was using a water tank brush to paint on the go, and while I love it for convenience, opaque layers are difficult to get right. Stubborn as I am, I wanted to push these further with a regular brush and a different gouache paint technique, and I'll combine the lessons I learned about gouache so far with urban sketching attempts in Seoul. No matter if you use gouache or watercolors or something else entirely, I hope this video inspires you to take your sketchbook of choice with you to a cafe, a museum, a friend's house, or even somewhere like a street corner or your own windowsill, and to find scenes in your environment you want to paint. It's amazing practice, and I'm excited to share what I learned. Let's start from the beginning. I feel like I started on a high difficulty setting with this view inside a cafe. The windows and spotlight lamps were the brightest elements, everything else cast in a deep shadow, and that immediately pushed me to the limit of my observation skills. And to one issue I have with gouache: the paints dry differently than what they look like wet. Darker shades tend to dry lighter, and light shades dry darker. So overall contrast is just never as high as I want it to be. I remember constantly going over the dark elements of the scene with more black, so now that I'm reworking this, I'm using wet instead of dry gouache paint to get a more opaque dark tone. Other than needing some darker shadows, I'm actually pretty happy with this as a first try. I'd be traveling with a friend, so a lot of these sketches had to be done relatively quickly, as we had places to be and food to eat. But this first sketch was painted while waiting, and it honestly took me a good hour for just this tiny painting study. As for my palette, I'm using this DIY travel palette I made. At this point I have several metal tins in different sizes, so I can swatch out my magnetic color pans as needed. The pans themselves are made from air-dry clay with lots of acrylic varnish to keep them water repellent and shiny, and with magnets glued to their back. For traveling, especially for just 2 nights, I didn't want to bring any paint tubes with me, so all my gouache paint used while travel sketching was dry, and I used it like slightly heavier watercolors. The second sketch, a challenge to try this whole window lighting again, but easier. I picked a simple view from the restaurant where we ate lunch and recovered from our very early morning flight, and I love how all the tiny potted plants turned out here. This was another slower sketch, sitting down and comfortable as we were, and I think this is where gouache feels best for me, when I have time to build up layers and intensity slowly, waiting for the colors to dry in between so I see what they really look like and can go back over them. If I wanted something quick and intuitive, I'd probably go back to watercolors instead for expressive patterns and granulation and their overall more luminescent colors. Gouache looks more muted and a bit chalky even, but they are semi-opaque to opaque, and it's easy to paint over elements I didn't like, which comes in handy for studies like this. I've seen a lot of wet gouache palettes and painting techniques, and while I'm curious about jelly gouache, for example, I just love gouache best as a convenient travel medium so far. The first sketch that I didn't paint on location was of this little bookstore in Itaewon. It's crammed full of secondhand books and a treasure trove for finding English language books, particularly also English translations of works by Korean authors. It even had moving shelves and was pretty magical to be in, but there really was not much room to move or sketch, so I snapped a quick picture of the shop entrance before we had to hurry on. I've always loved painting whimsical building fronts in watercolors, so this felt like a return to my comfort zone. But it was also one of the sketches that looked the most unfinished, and adding these opaque little details in gouache now that I'm back home was an amazing feeling. Like completing a puzzle after having done the hard work of assembling the frame pieces. While I tried to sketch on location for most of the weekend, the bookstore entrance and the next scene, a river at night, were the ones that I ended up painting from pictures at a cafe instead. I mentioned that I used a water brush while traveling, but once I got home and added these final details, I switched to regular brushes. The two that worked best for me are the Da Vinci Fit and an Escoda Prado. The Escoda Prado is an old favorite of mine from painting with watercolors. It's soft but not too absorbent, and I often used it for wet on dry techniques where I wanted to limit the water amount. The one I used for 90% of this painting session at home, the Da Vinci Fit Synthetic. This brush is a new addition to my collection. Size 0 brushes can feel very flimsy, but this has a nice spring to it, held just enough gouache to create creamy paint details, and it's very cheap. I might try out their flat brushes for gouache soon, as I was so surprised by how much I liked this one. Just 5 minutes of blocking in the building and tree shapes for my next sketch, while sitting at Cheongyecheon River that evening, meant half a dozen mosquito bites, so instead of suffering through that, I painted these the next morning over breakfast. We found this cute cafe with freshly made bread near Hapjeong Station, and I got a lot of painting done over coffee. A night scene like this is so much easier to paint in gouache than in watercolors, in my experience. Being able to paint over dark colors with a nearly opaque white, some yellow or red for hints of color, and create lights this way makes the whole process so much simpler. With watercolors, I'd have to plan ahead meticulously to get those lights to truly shine, for example using masking fluid or just by being very careful. The brush I'm using here is perfect for adding details to small paintings like this. It goes from medium shapes, like the buildings, to tiny details like street lamps and windows easily. I only used the larger Escoda brush to darken the trees in the foreground. From there, we walked up to the Hongdae area to Homi Hwabang, the large art store I can't resist visiting whenever I get the chance. My self-control was honestly astounding, as I only added 2 gouache colors to my collection, a yellow and a green, hoping they'd force me into some more intense color mixes instead of my usual muted hues. We went to look at some art and palaces later in the afternoon as temperatures went down. At this point, I knew I wanted to paint 2 more night scenes to balance the overall sketchbook spread. I didn't have a plan when I started these 8 scenes, but as I went along over the weekend, I started to look for specific views that would fit the overall composition. These 2 sketches of Doksugung were proper outdoor sketches for once, but by the time I started the second one, I could barely see what I was doing in the darkness. I love Korean traditional architecture, and while I like the soft watercolory sketch of this palace roof detail, I wanted to emphasize the vibrant red and blue-green colors of Dancheong. If you visit a Korean temple, you can see how colorful they are, with the blue-green making up a dominant part of that color palette, and symbolizing east and the element of wood. Red stands for fire, of course, and the direction of south. The other colors of Dancheong are white for metal and west, black for water and north, and finally yellow for earth and center. I'd bought the cool green color and a bright yellow one at the art shop with Dancheong in mind, and would love to paint more using this specific color palette in the future. Finishing this scene at home felt like I really got comfortable with gouache, finally. I used both white gouache paint straight out of the tube and dry gouache paint reactivated with water. The wet paint was great to mix with green and yellow, which I only had on my palette as dry paints, and create that creamy, opaque texture. While watercolors are perfect for me when painting large areas, creating beautiful gradients with wet-on-wet techniques and interesting granulation effects depending on the pigments and binder, gouache paint shines for small, intricate, layered details like this. They can go from nearly transparent when used with lots of water to nearly opaque when used fresh out of the tube, making them a versatile medium. In the future, I'll probably start carrying a tube of the white gouache with me for mixing with the dry colors on my palette, and maybe a black as well if I know I'll be painting night scenes to get that larger value range. This turned out to be my favorite sketch of the bunch, combining the watery, soft approach in the background with all the details and layers in the foreground. I'd be curious to know if you have a favorite from among these. They are just practice sketches, but I did try and find beautiful views or interesting colors all the same. The other scene from Deoksugung is this view of warmly lit windows from outside. Another scene, like that night river scene earlier, that would be so much harder to do in watercolors. By this point I knew what to expect from the colors. The black will dry lighter no matter what, so I went in with less and less water to make sure I'd go as dark as I could for the building. By old habit, I started with leaving the white of the paper for the windows, but as I went over the details at home, I discovered that the yellow and white gouache paint were more than enough to get that warm glow even when layered over black paint. Some white paint, still wet, was used for final highlights, and in the end, this was probably the simplest sketch, just needed some patience. Patience is one thing I need for gouache. Layers can be reactivated easily, so compared to my usual main medium when painting, acrylics, I have to be more careful to not turn the colors into a muddy soup when I go back in. I'm sketching in a sketchbook by Arsh, and these sketchbooks seem to be very popular here in Korea, but I can't find them anywhere else, strangely. They come in a variety of sizes and with different paper types. I'm using the A5 one with cold press paper. It soaks up water very quickly and makes watercolors shine, but of course, without taping and stretching paper, the pages turn very wavy as I fill them. It was slightly misty and humid that afternoon, with the sky a whitish, blinding hue, so I left the white of the paper blank and focused on interesting shapes I could find in this cramped street. I like to pick some key elements in a city view like this. Electricity cables, street signs, or unique window shapes, to not get lost in the overall chaos. When finishing this sketch at home, I made the edges of the building sharper. Using a water tank brush while on the go makes all the edges kind of blurry and soft, which can look beautiful, but can also give that slightly unfinished look. Hard, straight edges are very often human-made. Nature comes with softness and movement and a blend of colors, while a scene like this invites more precise angles and intense, straight out of the tube colors like flame red. To make the perspective clearer, I also added more contrast to the foreground with cables and hinted at Hangul script on the advertisements, while the background was lighter and uniform. Overall, this showed me how I like my gouache. Dry in my travel palette to activate with a water brush for quick, easy sketching, a mixture of dry and wet paint when layering with regular brushes. Also, another preference I discovered, I like small formats over large ones with gouache. I find it hard to get very even paint applications when going big with gouache, and at the same time, they lack some of those interesting patterns watercolors can bring to large paintings, and can instead turn out flat. I nearly failed my fill this spread with 8 scenes over the weekend goal, by the way. After one more gallery visit, we had to rush to the airport, our luggage heavy with books and snacks, and I only painted this impression from the exhibit while waiting for our flight. I think that still counts as part of this weekend trip, even if the last stroke happened seconds before boarding. This is the one sketch I didn't want to go and make more realistic, as I love the simplicity and abstraction I'd landed on. Maybe being forced to paint really quickly is actually good for me, but again, I have to be forced to do that, so we'll see how it goes. Even before going over them at home to just learn a little bit more and practice a little bit more, these small scenes were a great weekend project, just in their original state. They kept me creative and inspired on that short trip, and the memory of each location is etched into my mind. Coming home to finish the final details felt like tying a bow around everything and gave me a moment to reflect on how to improve these sketches, pleasing my inner critic and perfectionist. Overall, we spent a lot of time in the Insadong and Uljiro area, which is quite enough for a short trip like this, even if we made a quick trip over to Hongdae and Hapjeong. There are a lot of temples and palaces in this area of the city, so if the weather is nice and you have some downtime, I really recommend just wandering around here. There are also a lot of cute little cafes and a whole array of galleries showing a variety of art that I really enjoyed visiting. I'd especially love to give sketching at temples and palaces another try. It's always my favorite part of these travel sketchbook tours, and there's so much to discover in the colors and shapes of that architecture. I hope you enjoyed this small journey into my sketchbook and around Seoul. I'd love to create a similar sketchbook spread again soon, keeping snapshots of my environment and learning more about gouache as I go along. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in my next art video.